Nous célébrons aujourd'hui la première journée internationale de l'égalité salariale. Et il faut saluer dans ce cadre la mobilisation, elle est irremplaçable des syndicats, des gouvernements, des organisations d'employeurs, des entreprises, de la société civile et bien sûr aussi du monde de l'enseignement supérieur qui s'emploie résolument à promouvoir l'émancipation économique des femmes et l'égalité entre les hommes et les femmes dans le monde du travail.
We also acknowledge the individual men and women, many without a voice or platform, who continue the fight for equal pay every day. In spite of these efforts, we still have more work to do. Across the globe, women continue to be paid, on average, 20% less than men.
Moreover, the pandemic has heightened inequalities and shown how our societies are built on the essential and often undervalued contributions of women, many of whom work in occupations such as frontline responders, health professionals, and carers.
وهذا ما بدأنا في الوزارة بالعمل جاهدين على أن نؤمن الحماية الاجتماعية الكبيرة للنساء وخاصة في فترة جائحة كورونا كوفيد 19 كون هذه الجائحة قد أثرت بشكل مباشر على عمل الجميع وبشكل رئيسي عمل النساء.
So far, the crisis has affected more than 500 million women working in hard-hit sectors like accommodation, food services, and manufacturing.
At home, women continue to shoulder the brunt of care, from homeschooling children to caring for the elderly family members, plus the day-to-day chores of taking care of a family and a home.
In many developing countries, women are also amongst the most vulnerable informal workers. And this often means that they are not eligible for social protection and are at high risk of abuse and of exploitation.
Mientras buscamos las respuestas que mitiguen los efectos devastadores de la pandemia, debemos aunar esfuerzos para construir un futuro laboral que sea mejor, más seguro, más equitativo y sobre todo más resiliente.
This means advancing political and economic responses that prioritize equal pay for work of equal value, recognise the value of unpaid care work, increase women's representation in leadership roles, and provide access to affordable services such as childcare and healthcare.
We have formed a coalition, the Equal Pay International Coalition, which is a multi-stakeholder forum, and we invite you to join so that we can work together.
To mark International Equal Pay Day,
debemos aunar esfuerzos.
We invite you
to join EPIC.
To join EPIC.
Donc à rejoindre l'EPIC.
And take action
to advance pay equality.
And there you have it, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for making the time to join us, and welcome to the very, very first celebration of International Equal Pay Day, where we are focused on building back for a better future of work by ensuring pay equity. What you've just seen on screen are the voices of our EPIC steering committee members, really galvanizing us with a call to action. My name is Nozipho Tshabalala, and what a privilege for me to lend my voice to a conversation whose time has come, and a conversation of global importance. Ladies and gentlemen, it's important for us to also pause to think about, how did we find ourselves here? Well, we are here because at the 74th session of the United Nations General Assembly in November 2019, the 18th of September was declared as International Equal Pay Day. The resolution was sponsored by EPIC Steering Committee member Iceland and co-sponsored by a total of 105 UN member states. And these included Australia, Canada, Germany, New Zealand, Panama, South Africa, and Switzerland. And so, On this occasion of the first International Equal Pay Day, and in the midst of a global pandemic, it is more important than ever that EPIC, the only global multi-stakeholder partnership working to reduce the gender pay gap, make this global call to action. As we go through today, I hope that you're going to be responding to this call to action in your own way, big and small. What we are about to experience, ladies and gentlemen, is a stellar panel. We have an incredible lineup of panelists that are ready to share their experiences, their insights with us. But before we do that, I would like to invite you and maybe even challenge you to claim your share of voice in this conversation. And to do that, I'd like you to use the Q&A or chat function, the chat box function that we're using. Send me through your questions and your comments during the panel discussion, and I will try to the best of my ability to integrate your voice into the conversation. We're not going to have a separate Q&A at the end of the panel discussion. We're going to have a truly global dialogue. I know that at this moment we have close to 3,000 voices that are logged on to this conversation. So send me through those comments and let's have a global conversation. We're also going to be using some polls, and that's really for us to put a finger on where we are in our own understanding of the gender pay gap challenge. And so I'm going to be posing some questions, and I'm looking forward to seeing your interaction and participation. Now, you're probably seeing on screen my colleague. Her name is Maya, and she is the sign language interpreter. So she's going to be with us throughout the process, including Oliver, who's going to be taking over from her from time to time. There's also simultaneous interpretation. So please look to the bottom of your screen and you will see a global icon which says interpretation. You can then choose the language that you'd like to listen in. We've got English, French, Spanish, Arabic, and Russian. However, please note that if you are not on the latest version of Zoom, you will not have the Arabic option, but you will have a Korean option. So you can choose the Korean option and it will translate in Arabic. I'm also inviting you to come and see our Equal Pay website. It's the EPIC website. It's www.equalpayinternationalcoalition.org, because that is where we're going to be following up with some of the responses to the many questions that I know that we're going to be getting. We're not going to be able to take in all your questions, but we will address each and every one of them, so you can go to the website to make sure that to work through those responses for yourself. Finally, we have a responsibility to let the world know about this conversation happening right now. So I'm challenging you to use the social media platforms at our disposal. The hashtag that we're using is hashtag Equal Pay Day, and we're using it across all platforms. Remember, you can tag EPIC, ILO, UN Women, and OECD, and we will try and retweet and really create some noise around the conversation that we're having. So I'm really excited now to get going with introducing my panelists. And as I introduce them, I'm going to ask that they just quickly put their video on when I introduce them specifically, give us a little bit of a wave, and then switch their video back off as we get into the panel discussion. I'm going to start off with introducing I'm going to start with Samira Ahmed, rather. Samira is a BBC journalist. She's an award-winning journalist and a broadcaster. She's been on radio and television platforms since 1992, including the BBC, Channel 4 News, and Deutsche Welle TV. Her BBC TV series, The Art of Persia, was one of the first major documentary series to be shot in Iran in 40 years. Samira, what a pleasure to have you with us today. Thank you so much for joining us. Let me make my way over to Kristin Skogen Lund. Kristin, if you could pop your camera on for us. Kristin is the CEO of Schibsted in Norway. She was previously the Director General of the Confederation of Norwegian Enterprise. She was executive vice president at Telenor. She's been the CEO of a range of Schibsted brands, and she's even held positions at Coca-Cola, at Unilever, and the Norwegian Embassy in Madrid. She's also been a member of the Global Commission on the Economy and Climate at the ILO Global Commission on the Future of Work. Kristin, it's an absolute pleasure for us to have you with us today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Kristin. Let me make my way over to Nadia Soubat. She is the Executive Bureau member from the Democratic Confederation of Labor. Nadia, if we can get a quick wave from you. So thank you so much for joining us. Nadia is also the Secretary General of the National Union Public Works Sectors and Commission member of the Parity Now petition on behalf of the Democratic Confederation of Labor. It's an honor for us to have you with us, Nadia. Thank you so much. Let me make my way to Iris Bohnet. Iris, thank you for making the time to join us. If you could pop your camera on, lovely. Iris is professor at Harvard School of Business. She is the Albert Pratt Professor of Business and Government and is the academic dean of Harvard Kennedy School. She's a behavioral economist, and her research examines behavioral designs to de-bias how we live, how we learn, how we work. She's also the author of award-winning book, What Works? Gender Equality by Design, and spends most of her days advising governments and companies on the topic if she's not lecturing academics around the world. So lovely to have you with us, Iris. Thank you so much. Let me circle back and let me go to an introduction of Thorsteinn Viglundsoon. And we're really happy to have a man in the panel, as well as we heard from our EPIC steering committee. The gender pay gap is it's a humanity issue, and it's lovely to see men championing this. So Thorsteinn Viglundsoon, who I've apologized to in advance in case I'm butchering his name, is served as Member of Parliament in Iceland from October 2016 until April 2020. He was Minister for Social Affairs and Equality from January 2017 until November 2017. And most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, during his time as minister, he spearheaded and got approved the bill for the equal pay standard. And we're going to be unpacking that with him. Thank you so much for being here with us today. Fantastic. Last but certainly not least, I'm going to be introducing Megan Rapinoe. Megan, if you're on, please switch your camera on. But if she isn't, I know she is going to be joining us very shortly. But let me tell you a little bit about Megan. She is, listen to this, a two-time World Cup champion and co-captain of the US women's national team. She's a fan favorite. I'm a fan myself. And in addition to this, she's one of the team's most technical players. She's a vocal leader both on the pitch and off the pitch, and she's helped the US women's national team to get to the 2019 Women's World Cup Championship, where she scored some of the biggest goals of the tournament. Megan comes into this conversation as an advocate for equality for all, and really has been able to intersect her passion for humanity with her own innate authenticity. So, as I said, we have a stellar panel that has joined us today. But before we get to our panelists, before we hear what they have to say, I want to know what you have to say. So I'm going to launch a poll. And as we're launching the poll, I do want to just acknowledge how everyone from around the world is saying hello. We have people from Canada, from Rwanda, from Italy, sending us into the chat, saying, I'm from Egypt. I'm looking at all these different countries. I'm in New York City. Someone saying, I'm from Mexico. I'm going to keep acknowledging you because this is truly a momentous occasion. Thank you so much for being here. And yes, please keep saying hello. Someone says, don't forget me. Bonjour. I'm in Paris. Bonjour to you too. So let's do a quick poll. I'm going to ask the technical team to launch a poll for me. There are 3 questions that I'd like you to answer in this poll. And as we answer these questions, we're going to be reflecting on them. So technical team, can we launch the poll, please? There you go. So on your screen, you will have the questions. I will read them out in English. So here's the first question. What is the estimated global gender pay gap? Is it 9%? Is it 20%? or is it 32%? Please make your selection. And then move on to the second question, which is, has any country closed the gender pay gap? It's a simple yes or no answer. I'd love to hear what you have to say of this. Has any country closed the gender pay gap? And finally, can economies benefit from closing the gender pay gap? Can economies benefit from closing the gender pay gap? Yes or no? So please quickly take your poll. Remember to press the submit button at the bottom of your screen. And I'm going to ask the team, as I close the poll now, if they could do me the job of closing the poll and then reflecting the results back to me. I'd really love to see how we did in those responses. So there you have it. You could probably see the results on your screen now. What is the estimated global gender pay gap? 62% say 20%, and almost a third of us on this call say it's 32%. Well, the good news is the 2/3, the 62% is actually on the mark. Now, here's an interesting question. Has any country closed the gender pay gap? Well, the truth is 69% of you are correct. We are still sitting with no, but we're going to hear from Thorstein how far they are in their journey to really begin to close that gender pay gap. And of course, the impetus is for all of us to get galvanized to push for the same in our own countries. Finally, can economies benefit from closing the gender pay gap? A resounding yes. 99% and just 1% saying maybe not. Now, right now, I want to acknowledge that we have almost 600 people in the conversation already. So that's a really good sample to use. So let me come to the first question in our conversation. And I'm going to take the first question to Kristin. Kristin, I want us to think about this. So here's the question. It's really been well documented that pay equity translates into more women joining and remaining in the labor force. It translates into positive returns for the company in terms of productivity, reduced turnover, higher morale, attraction of talent. So firstly, the question is, why do you think this clear business case has not translated into equal pay? And keep in mind, Kristin, that 99% of our friends around the world right now all said there is a clear benefit of closing the gender pay gap to economies. So why is there a disconnect between the narrative, the business case, and the action?
Yeah, you're right. And I mean, there might still be some problem with awareness, but I think probably there are other reasons, you know? I mean, some of this has to do with tradition. It has to do with how women and their role in society is seen. But there is also, you know, a lack of cooperation to solve the issue better from governance, from social partners, and from employers, clearly. And I think it also has a little bit to do with choice, because women tend to make educational choices. For example, if I take Norway as an example, we have a clear majority of women choosing public sector. They tend to go into professions like care and education, which are traditionally lower paid. I mean, they're not into, so much into business and engineering and higher paying roles. And it is, of course, a fact that quite a few women they lag in the leadership career track, especially when they're in those crucial years early in the career when you form a family, etc. So even in quite equal Norway, we see these same tendencies, and I think we should ask ourselves how we can solve some of the more, let's say, root causes of it. And I think it has to do with making it easier to combine work life and family life. I think it has to do with really encouraging burden sharing between men and women also in the house. And I think, and very importantly, I think we have to encourage both employers and women to make more untraditional choices. So if you look at what governments can do, I think we should look at the stuff that we know works, right? I mean, parental leave is important, affordable childcare is important, and of course, equal educational opportunities. I think governments can work with the international organizations such as the ILO, UN Compact, UN Women, etc. And then I think also incentive and awareness programs actually work. I mean, programs that incentivize female entrepreneurship, encourage more women to choose differently in terms of educational choices, and raising awareness of the business case of equal pay, you know, and equal opportunity. And then what can employers do? I mean, employers need to be bold. They need to think differently and encourage diversity, but they have to do so in a systematic way. I mean, this has to be embedded in the HR and recruiting systems, you know, that we set up. And I have to say, on a personal note, it's also a little bit about this sort of the nudging of those representing that diversity. Because when I was younger, it wasn't so normal to have female leaders in business, and I wouldn't have made this way myself. I mean, I totally depended upon being seen and that someone encouraged me to develop my abilities and to take the bold moves and take the risk, you know. I totally depended upon that. And if we all can be a bit more encouraging and nudge the ones that we want to cheer on and make champions of those who dare to be that difference, I think that's also something we can all be more aware of.
Kristin, I think that's a fantastic way to kick us off. And I love the fact that you've ended on nudging, because I know that Iris will probably have views on this as a behavioral economist. But thank you for emphasizing the role of policy formulation from a government perspective, but also of systemic change from the perspective of employers. And of course, the point of nudging. Now, I am getting messages left, right, and center say, please recognize our country. So hello to Panama, Belgium, Namibia, Swaziland, Zambia, and Japan, and the Philippines. I'm seeing you too. Thank you so much, Kristin. Iris, I'm coming to you next. So if Kristin, we get your video off, and Kristin, and let's get Iris's video on. Iris, I'm sure you have some thoughts on the nudging, idea. So I'm very happy to listen to you share on that as well. But let's also come and zoom into the academic profession, which to some extent we know is not exempt from being tough on women, as is other industries. The question to you is, do you believe that there's been any progress over the years for women in your profession on these issues? And if you do think there's been progress, are there stubborn barriers that still need to be considered as well? And perhaps as an extra layer to this, there's usually a perception that in academia, the intersection of color and race and ethnicity also play a role in the gender pay gap. Is this true? Is it isn't? Here's an opportunity for you to educate us a little bit.
Thank you so much for this question. Let me first thank everyone on the screen and for listening in and for organizing such an incredible event for us. So I totally agree, of course, with Kristin that systemic change is what is required. So we have to stop fixing women or other underrepresented or disenfranchised or marginalized groups and really fix the system. And yes, nudging is one way to do that in addition to incentive. I think behavioral design is an additional toolbox that I'm of course very interested in sharing with the world. But let me focus on your question and go back to academia. I mean, whenever I'm asked a question like this, whether in academia or elsewhere, I start by diagnosing the causes of what I'm now going to call the raw gender gap. So that's just everything, not controlling for anything, just the raw gender gap, comparing average pay of women to average pay of men. And I'm also not thinking about intersectionality just for the moment, although I'll get back to that. So then two big culprits stand out. One is gender differences in seniority. And the second one is gender differences in occupations. So in the US, for example, only 25% of tenured professors are women, and there are about twice as many female psychology professors than female finance professors. Of course, there's nothing wrong with women choosing psych and men choosing finance, but it is true that tenured professors make more than more junior professors. It is also true that finance professors make much more money than psychology professors. And so that's just, not just academia. Generally, we find these patterns. It's both occupational segregation, as we economists like to call it, just men and women choosing different career paths, and then career advancement. In defense of academia, not that I'm feeling particularly defenseful, but in defense of academia, the gender pay gap is much more pronounced in other sectors, in financial services or in technology, where variable pay bonuses make the big difference. So, if you look for the big stuff, it's actually not in compensation and salary, it's in that variable pay. So what do I do? As you mentioned that I'm academic dean at the Harvard Kennedy School, what are we trying to do to kind of fight some of these tendencies? So first of all, I should mention, we do gender pay audits every year. So that's just actually now comparing apples with apples. So that's what every organization, private, public, NGO has to do. We just have to do those audits and make sure we control for discipline, experience, education, other factors. And ideally, we have to do that for our members of color and also for intersectionality, as I mentioned, women of color or men of color for that matter. And in the US, of course, we have the different race breakdowns. As you asked that question, let me just quickly address you. As I speak, you already see what one of the challenges, and that is that often our sample sizes are very small. So these calibration exercises don't always for every group. I'm now almost out of time. Let me say kind of one more thing. So what do we do for career advancement? So you have to de-bias your systems. I'm actually going to go back to Kristin, and you have to work allocation. How do you allocate your work? Are you women just, or are you people of color just organizing the seminars? Or are they in fact allocated the important work that is promotion relevant, such as research? You have to de-bias your performance appraisals, your promotion procedures, et cetera, et cetera. So really attacking the system, whether it is in academia or elsewhere, is really my most important message at this point.
Iris, thank you so much. And don't go away. I want to just quickly follow up with a question from Vicky. Vicky is saying here in the chat, do gender pay audits, which you've just introduced in the conversation, take into account equal pay for equal value or comparable worth? So a little bit more detail around how the audits actually work, if we can get that in 30 seconds.
Yep. So what we normally do is we distinguish between the raw pay gap, which is comparing average pay of men and women, and then that more specific pay gap that you now just mentioned, which then you run a regression and you control for other differences between men and women, right? And that could be differences in seniority, could be differences in education, in discipline, in whatever background they have. So that's what I meant with apples, that you really have, you hold everything else constant. That's what the pay audit does.
Fantastic, Iris. I think it's a great question. I'm coming to Samira next. But as I do, I just want to quickly read a comment here from Sylvie Gurría, who we'll be hearing from a little bit later. And she says, the next generation shouldn't fight the equal pay battle. It is our responsibility to solve this issue. It is a question of justice towards women and their family and of fair competition between companies. So loving some of these statements that are actually coming through in the chat. So Samira, I want to maybe come to your particular story and ask you the question, what triggered you to take action in relation to your employer on equal pay?
In a way, it's hard to know where to begin. I joined the BBC and it was my first job after university in 1990 as a news trainee, which was a fast-track graduate programme. And it is, to be honest, the only time I can be sure until now that I was earning the same as my male colleagues, because there was a standard rate for the job, which is what I passionately believe there should be, especially when the BBC is a public service employee. And over the years, I just knew when I felt I was being underpaid, and sometimes you try and challenge it. A couple of particular things happened. In 2016, I uncovered a 50% pay gap in one of my jobs. I work across a few different programs, and I challenged it, and eventually I got it corrected, but it was a real shock to me. That was one of 3 jobs. And then when the Prime Minister, Theresa May, changed the law requiring large public service employers, such as the BBC, to publish both their gender pay gaps and, crucially, their high pay lists. Like many women, I looked at the names on the list and I saw a man who was presenting an identical program to me, who was earning 7 times as much as me, I worked out. And I just knew, and I had been asking for 8 years since I started in this job, Newswatch, for my pay to go up. You know, when you have an instinct. So it was nothing to do with leaning in. It was just to do with the numbers. Crucially, all the male colleagues I spoke to, including my comparator, told me what they were earning. So my biggest thing was my male as well as my female colleagues supported me, understood the principle of equal pay. I joined a campaign to try and publish all BBC salaries in 2018. We wrote to our Director General this would solve the problem. But most of all, my union, the NUJ, encouraged all of us when the high pay list was published to think about whether we had a case, to challenge it. We tried to do it internally through the BBC. And in the end, my union agreed that when the BBC would not recognise my case, that there was a reason to go to law, and they funded my case. And so that's crucial to why I was able to challenge it, because I had my union and their support.
Samira, it's a fantastic way for me to segue to Nadia as you talk about the pivotal role that your union played. But it's interesting how, as a woman, the instinct, that gut instinct that tells us that this isn't what it should be, was probably the most primal trigger for you. We're going to come back to your story because I know we're going to have a lot of questions. But as I come to Nadia, I want to read a quick comment from Uma in India. And Uma says, in India, the context is highly related with intersectional discourse. Caste, communities, and social class determine the economic status of women. More or less culture, tradition highly hampers women enjoying equal economic status. It's an interesting contribution because it says to us there's another layer of cultural elements that we need to pay attention to in this regard. So thank you for that, Uma. Nadia, let's bring you back on screen. Let's bring you back on screen, Nadia. And here's the question. I want to bring the pandemic into the room. I want to bring the pandemic into the conversation because it's an important context that we cannot have this conversation in the absence of. The question to you is, let's start broadly with understanding how has COVID-19 affected the situation of women workers in Morocco? Please unmute, Nadia. Merci beaucoup.
Merci, ravie de participer aux travaux de cette conférence, première du genre pour rendre effective l'égalité salariale dans le monde. Les syndicats sont aux premières lignes pour lutter contre les retombées négatives de la pandémie sur les travailleurs et les travailleuses. Pour répondre à votre question, il serait utile de situer le contexte du monde du travail au Maroc. Il se distingue par un taux élevé de l'informel, donc qui va de 75 à 89% des emplois. Ce taux est de 60% au niveau mondial et proche de 18% pour les pays développés. La problématique du chômage est structurelle au Maroc et depuis 2018, le marché du travail a connu des sorties massives avec un taux élevé de féminisation. Dans le secteur de l'agriculture, la tendance baissière continue à cause de la sécheresse et la baisse de la production céréalière. Donc, un travailleur sur deux dans le domaine de l'agriculture est déclaré 6 mois à la CNSS et 15% seulement des travailleuses sont déclarées 12 mois. Donc, la protection sociale est très faible. Donc, dans ce contexte et avec l'arrêt brusque de l'activité économique, suite au confinement, une grande partie des Marocaines et des Marocains se sont trouvés dans une situation de désarroi total, car ne disposant d'aucun revenu. À fin avril 2020, 1 million de travailleurs et travailleuses déclarés à la CNSS, donc la Caisse nationale de sécurité sociale, sont en arrêt total ou partiel à cause du Covid. Ce taux était déjà faible avant la pandémie. La situation de la femme est devenue aussi très difficile. Celle-ci occupe en général des emplois précaires, à revenus faibles, souvent dans l'informel, et dispose de peu de protection sociale ou pas du tout. Étant donné le rôle traditionnel qui lui y sont attribués en général, celle-ci a dû prendre en charge beaucoup plus de tâches non rémunérées. En plus des problèmes dus à la promiscuité qui sont notamment la violence et donc tous ces impacts. Pour atténuer ces effets, l'État a créé, entre autres, un compte du Covid, alimenté par un élan de solidarité. En tant que syndicat, nous avons appuyé cette initiative et nous avons contribué activement. Les mesures prises par l'État ne sont pas suffisantes n'ont pas suffi à couvrir les besoins essentiels des salariés. Ainsi, une partie de la population était dans le scénario aucun revenu, aucune protection sociale. La Confédération démocratique du travail, dans ce contexte spécifique du Covid-19, œuvre pour continuer à syndicaliser et à mobiliser les travailleurs, car c'est le moyen pour la protection de leurs droits, l'amélioration de leurs revenus et la réduction des disparités salariales. Les nouvelles technologies de l'information dans ce contexte-là nous posent encore beaucoup de problèmes aujourd'hui au Maroc. La CDT a relevé que dans le contexte du Covid, il y a eu l'augmentation des infractions à la législation du travail, il y a eu les licenciements massifs et abusifs sans le respect du Code du travail, dont le taux d'application était déjà faible avant la pandémie. Un grand nombre d'usines où travaillent également les femmes ont été des foyers de Covid. Et donc, les femmes ont été contaminées parce qu'elles travaillaient déjà à la base dans des espaces qui n'étaient pas suffisamment aérés pour le travail. Dans ce contexte, les inspecteurs du travail ont un rôle important à jouer. Le nombre des inspecteurs du travail au Maroc est très limité. Donc, si le nombre est limité et ils ne disposent pas des moyens, ils ne peuvent pas faire le travail correctement. La Confédération démocratique des travail, elle demande à ce que le fonds du Covid reste permanent. Donc, pour la CDT, pour conclure, l'impact de cette pandémie pourrait être une opportunité pour la mise en place d'un nouveau paradigme basé sur l'égalité, l'équité et une vie décente pour tous. Mais cela exige au niveau des pays qu'il y ait une réelle volonté pour un dialogue social productif et l'intégration de toutes les parties prenantes nationales pour concevoir et mettre en place les dispositifs adéquats. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Nadia. That has been an incredible and very comprehensive response, really emphasizing that the vulnerability of women in sectors that have been hardest hit by COVID-19 and us having to be having real conversations about what that looks like. I also just want to pull in a comment here from Thandi, who says, I think we should also remember the effects of the equal pay gap and the pandemic on people living with disabilities. So as we can see, the complexity of the issue continues. Thank you, Nadia. I think you can put your video off. I'm going to make my way now to Thorstein with the first question that I want to bring to him. Thorstein, let's bring the Icelandic case study, if you will, or example into the room. We know that Iceland is well known for taking the issue of equal pay for work, of equal value very seriously. Question to you is, how did you manage to place this topic at the top of your national and international priorities, resulting in the adoption of the equal pay certification law and, of course, the UN resolution on International Equal Pay Day?
Well, a number of factors, of course, but there's been a growing momentum on gender equality in Iceland ever since the Women's Day Off for Women's strike back in 1975, which really started the political empowerment of women and resulting in the election of the first female president, and really gradually just putting gender issues more on top of the political agenda. And that's where it starts. It starts with the emphasis on quality childcare, equal opportunity in terms of work and education, and moving to parental leaves and board quotas, for example. Now we're into 2010, and then resulting in the gender or equal pay standard in 2017. And I would describe it's growing momentum. It's like a steam train, really. We are at a place in Iceland right now, you don't want to step in front of it. And it facilitates for politics to get things passed. And the systemic change has been mentioned, and I think Iceland and, for that part, for example, the Nordics are all at a place where you have the mandate, you have the support to make the changes necessary. So it is just a question of having the courage and decisiveness to do it.
So that's a lovely way of answering: courage and decisiveness and momentum and a systemic lens. That's a beautiful way of capturing almost the stickiness that leads us to change. I do want to bring in a question that was asked by Gokin or Ozkan a little bit earlier in the chat. And the question is this, Thorstein: which countries have most improved in scope of decreasing the pay gap? What are the secrets, do you think, of these accomplishments?
Well, we've heard a number of key factors here in the discussion so far. I mean, bringing bringing salaries really to the surface. That's a key area. Really, whether it's publishing figures or using a standard such as the equal pay standard to certify that gender-based discrimination is not taking place. And I call it reversing the responsibility, or the burden of proof is transferred from the employee to the employer, because there is no transparency in pay. We as employees cannot see clearly whether we're being discriminated against, and for the obvious reason, we also are not very willing to bring our employer to court, and the number of cases are very few. So that's really the simple beauty of the equal pay standard. It is getting the company to certify that they are not discriminating, and that is not, I would say, that's not too much to ask of employers.
It is shifting the burden of proof from the employee to the employer. And what I'm hearing you say, Thorstein, is that it's all about transparency and more transparency. I have a message here from Anuba Ramgopal, who says, Iceland has shown the path which should be taken by other countries. Some comments as well. Abduli says, culture and some religious misconceptions are one of the greatest causes of the gender pay gap. We have to have this conversation. So I want to go back to Kristin. Thorstein, thank you very much. I want to go back to Kristin in this conversation. Kristin, let's have your camera back on. So if we look at the numbers, we know that as per our second poll response that we, or the first question to the first poll, which was, what is the estimated gender pay gap? We know that women are paid about 20% less than men. And we also know that the current COVID-19 crisis is affecting women disproportionately. We heard that from Nadia in her contribution as well. The question, though, is that in contrast to previous crises, women's employment is at greater risk than men's as a result of COVID-19, especially because if we look at the sectors that are the most vulnerable to the pandemic, tourism, hospitality, retail, all of these are sectors where women are the majority. The question is, what innovative measures have some companies taken to address this very issue?
Right. Oh, yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. And I mean, there a lot of sectors, especially those dominated by women, are taking a terrible hit with the COVID. And I guess short term, I mean, you could have some alleviation from government programs, etc., but that's not going to be sustainable over time. So we need to solve it long term. And I would kind of argue that it's maybe not to look for innovation, because I'll go back to what I said earlier. I mean, we know what works, and I think it has to do with doing what you know will work. And I think Thorstein here is absolutely right in that, most women are not like you, Samira. They don't bargain for their salary, and it must be up to the companies to absolutely ensure that you have a standard of equal pay, and that we don't have such a law in Norway, but we would actually, we do the job job, and we will actually adjust where we see that there are discrepancies, because we simply do not want there to be that pay gap. And and again, you will get that back in transparency and in more women feeling encouraged and empowered by your company. So that pays off. It's a simple thing to do, and it works. I can give you another example. I mentioned earlier that we need to work a bit on educational choices. When I was at the Confederation earlier, what we did, we saw that women were consistently underrepresented in technology and engineering. In Norway, that number is as low as 17% of females, in those studies. So what we did was we went around to high schools and we interviewed girls, and we say, why don't you choose the STEM subjects? And mostly the answer would be, well, because I want to work with people. So we said, okay, we need to address this. So what we did was that we organized a program. We did let's say a tour de Norvège, visited every high school in the whole country with ambassadors, young female engineers that they could identify with. And we had those role models tell them that as an engineer, you can save the ocean, you can save the climate, you can you can improve healthcare and systems for elderly and whatnot, and made it appealing that way. And the program had tremendous effect. It was such a simple thing to do, and it had an almost instant effect on the applications to those subjects. So it's not about finding new innovating things. It's about doing simple things that we know will work. And can I just round off with one thing? As you know, Norway constantly is on top of lists of best place to live and prosperity and everything. And what happened to us in the 70s was two things. Women entered the workforce, much due to the fact that we had parental leave and state paid childcare, and we found oil in the North Sea. One of those factors significantly increased our national wealth, and it was not the oil. It was female participating in the workforce. It's such a good case for business, for the individual female, but also for society at large. So it's really about time that we fix this.
Thank you so much, Kristin. I'm going to follow up, Kristin, before you go, with a question from Udrak Amimo. She is a journalist in Kenya, and she says, what do we need to do to ensure that the unpaid work of women is recognized fairly and compensated? And I mean, I'm looking at a comment from Kali here as well in the chat saying, should we not be thinking about paying better for care and education jobs, and not just trying to push women into STEM? It's a really complex issue, but I'm keen to hear your response.
Yes, it is. And you are absolutely right, because, what are more important roles than taking care of the sick and educating our children, right? I completely agree with that. And if you want to look behind the systems a little bit, part of the reason why those careers are lower paid is because there is a collectivism in it, that you don't have so much individual salary difference that actually lifts the whole sector. That is part of the reason. We did a study on that. And so you would basically need to change the whole setup of the salary systems in the public sector if you are to attack that fact. But I agree with the argument. It makes no sense that those should be low paid jobs, really. So I agree. And we also need to make those professions more attractive for men, because if we're going to have more equality and women are going to do other things, someone is still going to take care of those responsibilities, right? And when it comes to recognizing, for example, taking care of the elderly and doing unpaid work, that is also a huge question. But certainly one thing one can do is to recognize those periods of your life when you need to do that, in terms of gaining the right to Social Security, earning pension points, and at least make sure that you don't fall out of the system when you take on those types of responsibilities.
Absolutely, and again, you've touched on the question of men, and I'm starting to feel that you can see all my questions, because that's what my next question is going to be, and I'm taking that question to Iris. And it's a question that really focuses on the element of men. Megan's just joined us. We'll be with her shortly. For now, though, let me ask Megan if she can put her video on mute, her video off, so that we can just focus on Iris for this question. So Iris, here we are. Kristin has just touched on the topic of men. And the question to you is, you know, as a professor, in a well-known university, you're lecturing on gender issues all the time. I'm quite certain the topic of equal pay has come up time and time again in your own lectures. The question is, what sort of feedback are you getting from your male students? And maybe at a more strategic level, how do we enable men to become allies and champions of closing this pay gap?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Clearly, we need to work on both the will and the way to change. So far, we've been focusing quite a bit on the way, with lots of examples of how we have to de-bias and the system, fix the system rather than fix the women or other marginalized groups. And that's truly very important. Much of my work focuses on the way. But you're basically now asking, you know, what if we don't have the will? How do we conquer hearts and minds? And I think this has two aspects. This is how I normally do it when I talk to even just purely male audiences in finance or tech, for example. So I think on the minds, we have already heard the business case. And I always kind of, you know, we just have to repeat it, the correlations between gender diversity and positive economic outcomes, that this is not a zero-sum game, and your gain is not my loss, etc. So I think that's important, but it's still pretty theoretical, and it won't be enough to reach the heart. So then my other strategy, and it's actually based on research, and you know, how do people, when are people more likely to engage in change and willing to change? So we have to make it personal. And so that's then the question. So how can you make it personal for those who might fear that they have to lose? And what I normally focus on is on them. I'm going to say them now, the white men in power, and their daughters. I mean, many of you are familiar with fathers of daughters. There's lots of research on that fathers of daughters become more gender equal in their values. So that's one strategy. But now let's just focus on the white men. What I then talk about is that research shows, for example, that small men make less money than tall men. Unattractive men make less money than attractive men. Of course, not to mention the race or ethnicity gaps in pay. So that's a way to make it personal. And then you can have a better conversation on, you know, is this fair? And what if you were the victim because you might not look the part? And then we can go to the systems again and talk, for example, about a practice that is still common in many countries, including my home country, Switzerland, but not so much in the US, for example, that people are asked to append their photos to their applications.
Right.
That's a practice that we know is not predictive of future performance. It's just research shows it. So why do we do it? And therefore allow bias to kick in even as employers evaluate these applicants. So that's kind of a way to think about this. I think we have to, you know, we have to either create the will by making this, by thinking about the business case, by creating incentives, by creating legislation. But I think we also need to win people's hearts. And that's typically being done by making it very personal.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Iris, for that. Make it personal. Put it within their frame of reality. There's a beautiful comment here from Marcus Priest. He says, hi, I'm from the future. I just wanted to say thank you and keep going. Your efforts are making a difference and this will lead to change. We will get there. Marcus, thank you so much. Now, I'm also seeing some fan moments. Ellen Walker saying, oh my gosh, Megan is on. So much respect. So I'm so sorry for this fan moment. Ellen, don't be sorry. We're going to be talking to Megan shortly. And so what I'd like to do is just push through 2 or 3 more questions. And then we're going to focus on a conversation with Megan before we begin to wrap with this panel discussion. And so Nadia, allow me to come to you with this, because I think at the core of this, although it hasn't been said, is social dialogue. And so here's the question. We know that social dialogue is a key contributing factor to improving equal pay between women and men. The question is, can you share briefly how social dialogue has contributed to eliminating the gender pay gap between men and women in Morocco.
Merci. Le dialogue social est un élément clé, en effet, pour améliorer l'égalité salariale. Donc, l'enjeu de l'égalité salariale entre les hommes et les femmes est un enjeu d'éradication de la pauvreté et un enjeu de développement durable. Les études montrent que les disparités de revenus entre les femmes et les hommes impactent négativement l'économie des pays. Et plus les inégalités économiques entre les hommes et les femmes sont importantes, plus l'écart entre les riches et les pauvres se creuse. Donc, sans faire de raccourci, on peut dire que la lutte entre la disparité salariale contribue à la lutte contre la pauvreté dans le monde. Le dernier rapport de la CSI sur les disparités salariales entre hommes et femmes a montré que malgré tous les efforts consentis au niveau mondial, le salaire des femmes reste en moyenne inférieur à celui des hommes de 23%. L'enquête tout à l'heure a montré que c'est à peu près 20%. Et cet écart se creuse dans le cas où s'ajoutent d'autres considérations de genre, notamment la couleur, la taille, etc., et selon le niveau de développement des pays. Au Maroc, cet écart salarial est environ de 30%. En plus, les femmes représentent un peu plus de 22% de la population active. Ce taux est faible et il est encore amené à baisser. Aujourd'hui, l'égalité des droits est inscrite dans la Constitution au Maroc. Elle est également dans le Code du travail. Et depuis 2020, le Maroc a adopté la budgétisation sensible au genre et un rapport spécifique au genre sera dorénavant associé au projet de loi de finances qui est présenté au Parlement. Mais il reste beaucoup de contraintes à résoudre pour améliorer les indicateurs de disparité sociale. Donc, pour la CDT, elle agit sur 4 niveaux essentiels. Donc, à l'international, pour le changement des lois, donc, et aussi pour l'action de solidarité, essentiellement aussi, l'action dans les institutions nationales. Et donc, nous avons contribué en tant que CDT à une étude réalisée par le Conseil économique et social marocain concernant la discrimination à l'égard des femmes. Il y a aussi l'action du réseautage. Nous œuvrons actuellement dans un réseau national qui s'appelle Mouna Daba en arabe, Parité maintenant, qui a entamé un lobbying pour une plus grande participation des femmes dans les instances nationales. Et puis, pour aller rapidement au dialogue social, il est en panne aujourd'hui au Maroc, au niveau national, parce que l'essentiel des accords ne sont pas mis en œuvre, et puis le syndicat est cantonné dans un rôle de consultation et non de négociation. Ceci, il y a quand même au niveau des entreprises des accords et des conventions qui ont mis la discrimination exacte dans toute sa philosophie. Donc, juste pour conclure, je voulais parler de la zone des libres-échanges où les syndicats ne peuvent pas rentrer, et ça, c'est un grand problème. Il y a aussi les multinationales.
Nadia, can I come back to you on the free trade zones? Can I come back to you on the free trade zones? I've just, I'm keen to bring Megan's voice in here before we run out of time, and we'll come back on the free trade zones, because I think it's an incredibly important point that you're making there about the free movement of labor and skills that's going to be enabled by the free trade zones. But Megan, welcome. Thank you so much for being here with us. Can I ask you to there we are. So Nadia, we can switch your video off. Thank you so much. So Megan, so I want to go back to an interview that you had with The Guardian following last year's Women's Football World Cup. You were quoted as saying, everybody is equal for equal pay and everybody wants it. The question to you is, what has made it so difficult for us to achieve this goal, even if for a World Cup winner like you, but for many countries around the world that are commenting even in this conversation, this is still somewhat out of reach. Your thoughts?
First of all, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here, and I'm really excited to be able to speak with everyone. I think when I think about equal pay, I think of it sort of in the context of the larger world and the systems and structures that are already in place. And so I think it's deeply entrenched in our society. Sexism is deeply entrenched, racism is deeply entrenched. And when you bring that into the workplace, all of those things, sort of hold over. And I think Iris was saying it, when we tackle a problem such as equal pay gap, we have to do it from every angle possible. So we already know from research that it's just good business to pay people equally. You not only get a better product out of your workforce, but for the economy, you're injecting much more money back into the economy. And women are not only, half of the world's population, but we're also, a huge portion of the spenders in the population. So you have to look at that. You have to look at the intersectionality of different races when we're talking about equal pay and how that plays a part. And I think you need to get at the hearts and minds of people. As Iris was saying, again, bring it to a level where people can understand, maybe point out a discrimination in their life or point out an inequity in their life and attack it from that point. And I think with all of that, it just takes a relentless commitment and a relentless desire. A lot of people in power have been there a long time, either them personally or just the person sort of like them. And a lot of these discriminations, I think, are just ingrained in people and something that's hard to move past. I also think the next step is really laying out the future and really laying out, like, even under-resourced as we are, look at these numbers. Imagine if we had funding. Even as under-resourced as we are, look at how well the World Cup did, or the TV audience numbers from the World Cup, or the jersey sales with the limited amount of data that we actually do have, and sort of lay out a path forward and almost say, I love the comment from Marcus, I'm from the future. That's so funny. I've actually been saying that a lot. Like, I'm from the future. I know it works. I see it in my own life. Let me lead you into the future. So sort of offering people a path forward as well, I think, is really important.
Fantastic, Megan. That's a beautiful way of segueing into the conversation. And maybe I just want to link what you've just said back to Samira. Samira, if I bring you back, I mean, you shared your journey with us very briefly around how you moved from gut instinct and leveraging your union to really bring about change. So what gave you strength during this journey?
Well, I have to say, women like Megan Rapinoe out there using her profile, making it about all women and not just about an individual is so important. And in my case, there are hundreds of women. We think hundreds of women have had pay adjustments at the BBC, many of them in lower paid roles off camera. This is what it's about. It's about fairness. And in terms of, what gave me the stamina was, I'm 52 years old. All my life, I was told it's about fairness. The law had been there since 1970. The law had been there since I was a baby, saying equal pay. And it wasn't happening. And especially when I had all the data, I'm an investigative journalist. I found all the information. I had my union who backed me, who saw the wider implications. And I just felt I have to put this out in public. Let a judge panel decide what is fair here. And law is a complicated business, but I knew that what the truth was. And I think it's about truth, it's about fairness. I need to emphasize the support of the public, the support of friends and family and complete strangers who would come up to me on the street and tell me how glad they were. Men, women, every gender, every age, every background. This is about fairness. It is not about women wanting something over men. And I think Megan absolutely nailed it when she said, there are people who, there's a way of saying it, when you've always been privileged, equality feels a lot like discrimination. And if you look at the reporting around Megan's case, around my case, around any case where a woman is in a high profile, relatively well-paid job, there'll always be a reason why you don't deserve it. One of the biggest things that inspired me and gave me the strength was seeing how many women have been fighting the same battle again and again, going back to the Ford, Dagenham factory workers who are looking for equal pay for equivalent work, whose case inspired the Equal Pay Act, women like the Grunwick factory workers who are women of colour who are being racially discriminated against by their employers, and galvanised the whole trades union movement. And it's ongoing with many city workers. But I would say men and women are on the same side on this. most of us get it. And I think it's very important that we take strength from the reality of equality means fairness. It is men and women as allies, and that gave me strength.
Oh, Samira, that's absolutely fantastic. Laws don't bring about change, people do. And I think that's a fantastic soundbite there. If you've always been privileged, equality will always feel like discrimination. And it's such an incredible point to begin to unpack. Before I make my way back to Megan, I do want to come back to Thorstein here. Thorstein, I want to bring the reality that we know that Iceland has set itself an ambitious target of closing the gender pay gap completely by 2022. If you achieve this would be the first country to do it decisively. What would you say to political leaders who are still not brave enough, or perhaps are not convinced about taking this decisive step? And also, are you on track? Which is also, I think, a very important part of this conversation.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, the argument for gender equality is so obvious, and Kristin made a beautiful remark earlier, pointing out to Norway's wealth. And you can say the same for all the Nordics. We rank among the highest in the world in gender equality. All the Nordics do. And when you look at all indexes for quality of life, for GDP per capita, or however you want to measure it, these 5 countries almost always rank in the top 10. And I think the level of gender equality in these countries is the key explanation for this success. So, I mean, for politicians that want to improve quality of life in their country, improving gender equality is the obvious course of action to go. And I mean, in many cases, of course, women are lacking from politics, so we are lacking political empowerment of women in many of these countries. But men also need to get involved. And as has been discussed here, I mean, gender equality is not a threat to men. We benefit from it as well. And we need to get much more active in promoting it and working for it. And, you know, people in politics, you always have to bear in mind, change doesn't just happen. We need change when it comes to gender equality and equal pay for work of equal value. And we have to drive that change. We have to be that change. And therefore, politicians have to get involved on it and dare to drive the change that we need.
Thorstein, it's an incredible contribution there. If we want to deliver quality of life to our people, we need to do the right thing. Gender equality and closing the gender pay gap is not a threat. I'm seeing a comment from Judith saying, I don't agree that legislation doesn't bring about change. So Judith, remember it's and. We're saying legislation and behavioral change. So we're not saying either or, that, but the point being that legislation is important, but legislation that's not implemented is not actually going to bring about change. And legislation that is not designed to speak to the core of why we should be doing things is not going to bring about the behavioral change. That's the point that I was making. So let me come back to Megan as we begin to close off this conversation. Megan, I'm keen to hear from you. As you have been vocal on and off the field on this issue, what are the big lessons you might have been learning along the way? And in particular, although we know that there has been some progress in the space of football, with other countries like the UK really pushing to close that gender pay gap, there are still many women, whether they're in the sporting fraternity, whether they're in business, whether they're in the informal economy, whether they're in academia, that are still every day in the trenches fighting for equal pay. What would you have to say to them? So what are your biggest lessons so first? And then what words of advice would you have to share with women who are still rolling up their sleeves even today?
I think for me, the biggest piece of advice that I would give, and it comes from this very unique position, which I've been very fortunate to be in, of being on the women's national team, but more than that, being in a profession where the 23 women around me are elite in the world. And I think oftentimes when women who are elite find themselves in their workplaces, they find themselves alone or only with a few. And I'm very lucky that my immediate workplace has all of those type of elite, confident, trailblazing women. And so for us, I think we gave ourselves the permission structure the only people we look to see if anything is okay is ourselves. So we're like, yeah, we should go for equal pay. And so I think for women in their own profession, I would seek out other women, whether it's in your company up and down the hierarchy structure, or within other companies or groups online. I would really and truly seek out not just the camaraderie, but the sharing of ideas, the sharing of information, and you get a little bit more transparent, I think, to see what other industries are going through and what's happened in other workplaces, and really bounce off each other and just have that, you know, that sort of sisterhood, if you will. But it's the exchange of information and the confidence that is really there. I think, you know, touching on all of these points, like you said, it's an and. It's never just one thing. We are going to need women to, you know, fight as hard as they can to organize, to come at it from every angle. We are going to need the political will necessary to not only enact legislation and enact laws, but also to enforce it. You know, all of the social will in the world is nothing if you don't have the legislation, and all of the bills in the world are worth nothing if, you know, society doesn't want it. And so I think you really have to couple those and try, like I was saying before, just try to come at it from every single angle that you possibly can. You know, understanding that, I think I've sort of realized this fight goes so far beyond me. And the best parts of it will most likely go to people who are younger than me, especially on the team. But the fight in and of itself is truly changing the world sort of before our very eyes. And I take confidence from that. I take confidence in knowing that I'm able to be in the position and fight this round of the fight because so many other women have fought before me. And men too, but we absolutely need men to lean in much more. It can't get to the point where the only reason that you're in this fight is because you had a daughter, because, you know, potentially you had a wife also, and you had a mother, and you had a sister, and you had an aunt. Now you're just feeling the discrimination more so because you want to protect your child. But we need to get sort of all of these aspects of our social life, whether it be government, whether it be the political will, whether it be the social will, and really couple those all together and just have that relentless type attitude.
Megan, thank you so much. A fantastic way to close off the panel discussion. It is about seeking out other women. It is about sharing ideas. It is about sharing strategies. It is about figuring out what has worked and how can I borrow the strategy and make it work in my environment. And as you say, the fight is long from over, but we have to keep on keeping on. Now, with where I am in the program now, I'm going to transition into our closing remarks for the day. I want to give a very big thank you to Thorstein, to Megan, to Samira, to Kristin, to Nadia, for all lending their voices to this conversation with incredible insights and incredible contributions. As we move into our closing remarks now, it's my absolute pleasure to call upon the Director General of the International Labour Organization, Mr. Guy Ryder, to kick us off with his closing remarks. Mr. Ryder, it's over to you, sir.
Thanks very much. And let me just say that was a really inspiring and brilliant panel, well worth the occasion of our first International Equal Pay Day. Let me take advantage very quickly at the beginning to, if you're still online, to shout out to Thorstein. Thanks so much to Iceland for having created this day, led the resolution that put this day in place last year. It's worth looking at that resolution. It's not something I would normally recommend that people look at UN resolutions, because it makes a lot of the key points that have been made in the panel today. It firstly points to the extraordinarily slow progress we've made on equal pay. You know, the ILO, I don't want to be the man from the past, rather the person from the future, but it was 100 years ago that we enunciated in our constitution the principle of equal pay for work of equal value. And here we are 100 years later having this conversation. You know, it needs to make you think, doesn't it? Secondly, that resolution talks about something which has come out at least implicitly in the conversation, and that's about, this is a debate about power relations in society and the unequal distribution of power. And that's come out, I think, very much, you know, it's very correct to say that we all gain from equal pay collectively. Individually, that's not necessarily the case. And we do have to take into account and act against the negative distributions of power. Thirdly, we've made commitments coming out of our ears for equal pay. We've made them over the decades. What we don't really need are more on-paper commitments to make this happen. We need action to make it happen. And that's where I think the key for this conversation is. It is remarkable, is it not? And I think we have to pay tribute to some of the panelists we've heard. What individuals who have the capacity to do so can do to mobilize activism and public opinion on these issues, be it in the media, be it in sport or wherever else it is, business, in trade unions. But we've made the point, this is a plus, plus, plus story. Individual activism, extraordinary, bravo. Secondly, collective action. So where Samira can rely on her union, where Megan tells her that reach out to others, where Thorstein reminds us that it was the entire female population of Iceland that went on strike in the 70s. Collective action makes an extraordinary difference. And it's plus, plus, plus in a sense that laws do matter. I think that legislation, national and international, but obviously not enough. Most of our member states in the ILO have a legal requirement to apply the principle of equal pay for work of equal value. The actual application of that law is full of pitfalls. This notion of equal value is massively complicated. And then there are, in addition, all of those hidden obstacles to equality. Well, mostly hidden. So we talk about unequal care burdens. We talk about care facilities. What Kristin said about Norway in the 1970s, less oil that made the difference, more care facility. We have to re-engineer the way our labor markets and indeed our societies are organized to dig out these very under the surface obstacles to equality. Once we start doing all of those things, then I think we can probably look forward to much quicker progress than we've been able to record in the past. We've done good things. To deny that is to sort of lead to a sort of fatalism about what we have ahead, but we need to do better.
We've done good things, but we certainly need to do better. And it's a story of and. It's a story of action, but it's also a call of collective action. A very big thank you to the Director General of the ILO. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me now to move to the Secretary General of the OECD, Mr. Angel Gurría, to please take over now as he extends to us his closing remarks for the session. Sir, the floor is yours. If we could have your camera on at this moment. Thank you so much. So, Mr. Angel Gurría, I can see you are on screen. So allow me to do this while we make sure that we have the Secretary General of the OECD, if he is available now. Alternatively, technical team.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now, sir. Lovely
Very
to hear
good.
your voice. We'd love to see your face as well.
If the host will allow me, the host has disabled, so.
Your camera. All right, host, please, can we enable the video camera for Mr. Angel Gurría, please, so we can get, there we go. We can now see you and we can over to you.
You can now see me and you can hear me.
Yes.
Very good. So, dear friends, it's an honor to join you in this first International Equal Pay Day, which serves as a stark reminder of the persisting injustice of women being paid less than men. There. Across the world, the gender pay gap remains at around 20%. The situation is marginally better in OECD countries, where the average gap is 13% at median earnings. But progress remains slow. As Guy Ryder mentioned a moment ago, he was talking about 100 years ago. Let me just mention that in the last 20 years, when this issue has been very much in our agendas, we've only seen a reduction of 5 percentage points in the gap. When we were, fully dedicated and fully honed in on this, we made very modest progress. The economic fallout from COVID-19 threatens to reverse the progress that we have already made on this. Sectors that are major employers of women, such as food, beverage services, accommodation, retail, have been the most affected by the crisis. And women tend to do a much larger share of unpaid care work than men, on average, about twice as much in the OECD countries. And that makes finding alternative employment more difficult for them. The crisis disproportionately exposed women to the virus because they make up almost 70% of the workforce in the health sector and just over 90% of the long-term care workforce on average across OECD countries. We've also documented an increase in domestic violence against women during the pandemic. Now, when I say in OECD countries, please understand, you're talking about the 38 better off countries. Imagine now, translate this into the very dire institutional situations, legal situations in many of the developing countries. And then you can imagine, for example, this question about violence against women, etc. Then you can imagine how all of this is affecting people, not only women, in developing countries. Governments have taken swift action to respond to the crisis, including by providing childcare support to working parents in essential services and encouraging flexible working. But government policy, no matter how effective, is not enough. Looking ahead to the recovery phase, we need to address structural inequalities by mainstreaming gender considerations and economic and social policy measures. So we're talking about governments, we're talking about employers, we're talking about trade unions, civil society, and other stakeholders have to work together to introduce a smart mix. This discussion that we've been having in the last few minutes about whether legislation by itself or not, which is, I would call it the smart mix of legislation, policy measures, workplace practices, and also awareness campaigns. This also has to be part of the mix. This is why the call to action that is going to be presented is so important, is so crucial, because it has that mix. So dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, at the OECD, we remain committed to EPIC and to promoting equal pay for work of equal value to build back better. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That is, of course, the Secretary General of the OECD, Mr. Angel Gurría, reminding us there that it's a smart mix. It's a smart mix of legislation, of policy, of workplace practice, and of individual action. Thank you very much for those words. Ladies and gentlemen.
And awareness. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to turn our attention now to a short video that has been forwarded to us by the Deputy Executive Director of UN Women, that is Madame Asaregna, who's also sending their closing remarks with this short video. Thank you so much.
Good morning, good afternoon, guests and colleagues. I'm delighted to take part on behalf of UN Women today in the first global call to action to honor the International Equal Pay Day. And a special thank you to the government of Iceland for your leadership and to the 105 member states for their support to the resolution on the International Equal Pay Day. Today, we have to recognize both the hard-fought progress, but we also have to acknowledge the challenges that still remain. 25 years after the adoption of the Beijing Declaration and the platform for action, no country has closed the gender pay gap. Instead, women still undertake 3 times more care work than men, which is causing long-term consequences for their economic security. Women are still overrepresented in sectors which are underpaid and undervalued, whereas men are overrepresented in highly paid sectors. We also know in general in societies and in politics and other forms of decision-making, women are still underrepresented and men are overrepresented when it comes to power. COVID-19 showed us what women's work means. Women worked and still work with their competence, skills, loyalty, solidarity, and resilience in healthcare, in grocery stores, in agriculture, in education, in elderly care, to just mention a few of the areas where women work. These kinds of jobs are typically and many times undervalued, underpaid, and sometimes not paid at all. This can change. We can enact and implement laws which uphold the principle of equal pay for work of equal value. We can promote policies which eliminate gender stereotyping. We can redesign family-responsive services and policies, such as shared parental leave schemes, and see to it that they are implemented. We can adopt measures which reduce and redistribute women's unpaid care work and do whatever is possible to make men's part of unpaid care work increase. We can improve the quality of wage data. So now is the time for all actors, stakeholders, and decision makers to take coordinated action to remove the persistent barriers that prevent women's equal participation in the workforce and which continues to undervalue and underpay women's work in the labor market. And that's why we've come together as EPIC members and allies to jointly and together build a better, more sustainable and equal world of work for both women and men. Thank you very much.
It's a very big thank you to Madame Masaregna, the Deputy Executive Director of UN Women, lending her voice as well to this incredible moment of the first International Equal Pay Day. Ladies and gentlemen, what I'd love to do now is to present to you the National Equal Pay Day video that is going to be forwarded or shared to us, where we'll be hearing from Antonio Guterres, the United Nations Secretary General. So back to the technical team as we listen to the UN Secretary General, please.
Around the world, despite decades of activism and dozens of laws on equal pay, women still earn less than 80 cents for every dollar men do. For women with children, women of color, women refugees and migrants, and women with disabilities, that figure is even lower. If you had told me this 40 years ago, I would have been shocked. But according to the World Economic Forum, it will take 257 years to close this gap. The early signs are that the economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic will make the gender pay gap even wider, partly because so many women work in service industries, hospitality, and the informal sector, which have been hardest hit. Women's unequal status at work feeds inequality in other areas of their lives. Women's jobs are less likely to come with benefits like health insurance and paid time off. Even when women are entitled to a pension, lower salaries mean lower payments in their old age. Equal pay laws have failed to put this right. We need to go deeper and work harder to find solutions. Rising the profile of the gender pay gap is an important step. So I welcome this first International Equal Pay Day, and I congratulate everyone who has made it happen. We need to ask why women are relegated to lower paid work, why professions that are female-dominated have lower salaries, including jobs in the care sector, and why so many women work part-time and why women see their wages decrease with motherhood, while men with children often enjoy a salary boost. And finally, why women hit a ceiling in higher earning professions. Some of the solutions lie in ending harmful gender stereotypes, removing institutional barriers, and sharing family responsibilities equally. We need to recognize, redistribute, and value the unpaid care work that is disproportionately done by women. The COVID-19 pandemic has exploited and exposed inequalities of all kinds, including gender inequality. As we invest in recovery, we must take the opportunity to end pay discrimination against women. Equal pay is essential not only for women, but to build a world of dignity and justice for all.
And of course, that's a big thank you to the United Nations Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres. Ladies and gentlemen, that now brings us to our global call to action. It's a pleasure for me to hand over to Madame Sylvie Durer, who is the chair of the EPIC Steering Committee. Madame, if you unmute yourself, we're ready to hear from you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mrs. Tshabalala, and thank you for your great moderation. So, ladies and gentlemen, the COVID-19 pandemic has shocked the world of work, causing massive human suffering and laying bare the vulnerability of many millions of workers and enterprises. According to ILO estimates, 400 million full-time jobs have been lost since the outbreak. Taking together employers and own account workers, more than 436 million enterprises in the hardest hit sectors worldwide are currently facing high risk of serious disruption. The pandemic has affected women and men in the world of work differently. Women's employment is at greater risk than men's, with a larger proportion of women working in sectors severely affected by the crisis. The vulnerability of many women in the informal economy has also been exacerbated, and their livelihoods have been put under extreme pressure without adequate social protection coverage to support their resilience to the crisis. While the pandemic has brought into sharp focus the value of the work of the millions of women and men in essential occupations, such as health and social work, it has also been a somber reminder of how these jobs are too often characterized by low pay, long hours, and difficult working conditions. The Equal Pay International Coalition, in short EPIC, calls for concerted efforts to promote equal pay for work of equal value and to ensure that any advances made in closing the discriminatory gender pay gap are not reversed. EPIC members are united in calling upon governments, employers and workers' organizations, the private sector, academic institutions, as well as civil society to work towards a future world of work with equal pay for all. EPIC appeals to governments to ensure that integrated policy responses aimed at mitigating the job and income losses due to COVID-19 or supporting sustainable recovery are human-centered and promote gender equality. As businesses gradually resume their activities, EPIC appeals to the private sector to take measures to push for greater gender equality and to prioritize recognizing, treating, and paying women and men equitably. Social partners have a crucial role to play. That's why EPIC calls upon them to work together to ensure that gender equality is put at the center of solutions for all employers and workers. EPIC reminds civil society organizations to continue their important role in raising awareness and promoting concrete and coordinated action to tackle pay inequalities. EPIC will promote similar conversations in Asia, Latin America, and Africa in the near future. It is only together that we can ensure that the response and recovery efforts lead to building back a more sustainable, fair, inclusive, and secure world of work. I wish all of you an inspiring Equal Pay Day and great success in your engagement. Thank you very much.
A very big thank you from you, Madame Sylvie Gurría, for really igniting and putting fire between all of us. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for making the time to join us for what has been an incredible milestone, the first ever International Equal Pay Day. Remember, we want to keep this conversation alive, so please remember the hashtag is #EqualPay. We can continue to amplify the conversation around the world. Don't forget to visit our website. It's www.equalpayinternationalcoalition.org. And you can also follow us on Twitter. That's at EPIC2030, EPIC2030. From myself, Nozipho Tshabalala, what a privilege to lend my voice to such an incredible conversation. It's an absolute honor. To everyone who's joined us, thank you and goodbye.